So the community member families.
Right. I'd like to call to order the April 17th, 2024 meeting of the Lake Stevens Planning Commission. We can all stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And roll call, Commissioner Morton. By Commissioner Jennifer Davis. Commissioner Holt.
Here.
Commissioner Dewar. Commissioner Huxford.
Present.
Commissioner Packard.
Present.
And myself, everybody is in attendance. Any guest business? Nothing there. Okay, that moves us to our first action item. Did everybody get an opportunity to take a look at the minutes from our March 2020 meeting? Right. Any questions, amendments?
I saw none. I would make the motion to approve. I'll second it.
Right, all in favor
Aye.
and opposed? Okay, so moves us to the first discussion item. That's the comprehensive plan update. Hey, good evening, sir. We had just addressed guest business. I didn't know if you had anything that you would like to share with the Planning Commission?
Sorry, was that addressed to me?
Oh, no, sorry. There's a gentleman just came in.
Ah, okay.
The presentation is this is a very important meeting. We're kind of at the beginning of a new phase to me. I want to come here and sit in on it.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate you joining us.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Chair Davis, Commissioners, David Levitan, Senior Planner. So we are here tonight to continue our review of some of the draft elements for the comprehensive plan. As a reminder, we are updating the plan. It's a state mandated periodic update that must be completed by December 31st. If you look at your screen, this is just a slide, a little bit of an overlook of the process to date and then the upcoming steps. So we've gone through kind of some of the background work and some of the initial community outreach was done last spring, summer, and fall. Moving into the winter and now into the spring of 2024. We've begun drafting the individual elements or chapters. There are 9 individual chapters to the comprehensive plan. At your last meeting, you reviewed the public services and utilities element. Before that, you had previously reviewed a draft of the parks, recreation, and open space. This evening, we are going to be reviewing the introduction, which is chapter 1, which kind of establishes the framework and the general tone and tenor of the comprehensive plan, and then a draft of the economic development elements. Just before we get into the economic development element, we will likely be making some additional changes to that chapter as we really get into some of the additional land use analysis. There's kind of a cyclical and nature between land use and economic development, and also with housing. So as we continue to make updates to some of these chapters, we'll be also be revisiting some of the ones that you've updated. And so there may be some additional changes that are reflected in the drafts that you review at the public hearing stage later in the year. We're also going to be doing some additional outreach, scheduling some housing and transportation events in May and June. So we'll be updating you on that. Those are likely to occur. We'll probably be holding just one meeting, one official planning commission meeting in each of those months, and then scheduling kind of a standalone meeting where we would appreciate planning commission attendance. So we'll provide more details on that as we build out that schedule. And then also we're starting our SEPA environmental review. I don't know if we've talked about this a whole lot. So typically the intersection between the Growth Management Act and the State Environmental Policy Act, even at the planning stage for like a comprehensive plan, you're required to evaluate the potential environmental impacts. Given our ability to largely meet our growth targets without any major land use map amendments or zoning map amendments, we've discussed a few, but most of them are zoning map amendments that already have the underlying comprehensive plan designation in place. So we're not in a situation that cities say Linwood or Mount Lake Terrace or Edmonds, where they're needing to increase their zone capacity by thousands and thousands and thousands of units. So they're preparing what are called an environmental impact statement, where they evaluate multiple alternatives. Here in Lake Stevens, our need to make changes and map amendments is a lot more minor. So we're actually going to be doing our environmental checklist. At first glance, it looks, we're waiting on some of the transportation analysis based on the land use assumptions. But once we get that back, we're going to be starting the environmental review. And we expect that to show no significant potential adverse impacts that cannot be mitigated. So we anticipate having more information about that later in the spring and into the summer, but that will move forward with some of the draft element review, and we'll be ready. And that SEPA threshold determination will be issued prior to the public hearings for the comprehensive plan update once we've done all the draft element reviews and bring back a full document. So with that, touched on a little bit of this as far as the history of elements that we've reviewed. And then coming up, we are looking to review the environmental and natural resources element on May 1st. And then move forward after that with the transportation and capital facilities elements. We have a Transpo group, a consultant that's helping us with that. And then we've continued to work on the land use and housing elements. Those are probably the two that have the largest number of changes. So we're continuing to incorporate some of the growth assumptions and update some of the narrative and some of the graphics within those chapters. So we'll be bringing that back to later in spring, early in summer. So with that, the first chapter that we are reviewing tonight is chapter 1, which is the introduction. And really, what's the role of the introduction? As with most documents, it frames the discussion in the document, talk about things like state, regional, and local planning processes, really opportunity to talk about the growth that's occurred and some of the changes that have occurred in Lake Stevens since 2015, when the last periodic update was completed. Recent trends in legislation. There's been a lot related to housing, climate change adaptation and mitigation, as well as better incorporating the issues of equity as well as sustainability into policy language. And then also talks a little bit about the integration between the Growth Management Act and the State Environmental Policy Act. It also identifies the process for updating the plan, including the annual docketing process, basically the criteria that are used, the process that's used, how citizens, residents, business owners, employees can get involved in the process. So if you have thoughts on that, we didn't make a whole lot of changes to those sections. So if you have thoughts on that, we'd be happy to hear them as far as opportunities to maybe streamline some of that. So those are the major components of the introduction. The introduction is attachment 1 in your packet tonight. So it includes a number of updated demographics, info on recent planning efforts. A major focus is on some of that state legislation, specifically House Bills 1181 and 1220. Try to incorporate more graphics, maps, and call-out boxes. These are early drafts. We anticipate providing higher quality graphics and, This is really a draft document. We anticipate working on the design and the layout in the future, but we're not really focused on that. We would just want to get to the draft content at this point, and then we'll work on making it a little bit prettier at a later stage. As I mentioned, the discussion of the SEPA review. And then one of the major components, as we looked through the 2015 vision, we didn't identify, and based on some of the early feedback that we received from the community over the summer and into the fall, we didn't see the need for a major update to the vision statement. You don't always update your vision statement, do a complete rewrite in advance of the periodic update, because this was done back in 2015 and largely held true. We would welcome any additional feedback from the Planning Commission, and we'll also be asking the City Council about any maybe minor tweaks to the vision statement. It's kind of summarized within the introduction, and it's actually included within at the beginning of the executive summary, which we haven't reviewed yet, but I would welcome planning commissioners to look back through that if you have any proposed changes to that, any direction that you can provide to us. We're happy to incorporate that and discuss that internally with the Planning Commission, and then also bring that topic up before the City Council. So I'm happy, we can go through and I can provide an overview of the economic development element, or we can kind of stop here and give the Planning Commission an opportunity to weigh in on kind of some of the changes or some of the additional items that you'd like to see in the introduction. I don't have a preference. It's kind of the preference of the commission as far as if you'd like to stop here and discuss the introduction, or just kind of move through with the summary of the economic development element. It's only a couple more slides, and then we can kind of move through the changes and initial thoughts and feedback on both of them. So whichever way the commission would like to do that.
Any thoughts? Just keep going through to the, yeah.
Okay.
Move
Yeah,
on.
this will be really quick. So,
Awesome.
So the second chapter that we're reviewing tonight is chapter 6, which is the economic development element, which is another mandatory element under the Growth Management Act. As a reminder, and for anyone in the audience, there are mandatory elements under the Growth Management Act, and then there are optional elements. Economic development is one of the mandatory ones. It requires cities and other local jurisdictions to create local goals, policies, objectives, and provisions for economic growth and vitality and a high quality of life, directly related to the GMA goal related to economic development. So as a reminder, there are 15 GMA goals, and economic development is one of them. At the local level and at the Lake Stevens level, a major component of the economic development is to really identify the city's employment and economic growth strategy. Basically, how are you going to meet the needs of your residents? How are you going to meet the needs of your businesses, your employees? How are you going to meet the growth targets that have been mandated for the city of Lake Stevens following the process, the kind of collaborative process with Snohomish County? A lot of the major way that Lake Stevens does that is through growth centers, which were kind of largely established back between about 2006 and 2010. Basically, part of the periodic update that happened back in 2006 really laid the foundation for that most of our commercial, industrial, and other economic growth was going to happen within growth centers. As we moved through the years and got to 2012, we adopted 2 different sub-area plans, one for the 20th Street Southeast Corridor and another for Lake Stevens Center, basically off of State Route 9, basically Frontier Village area, and kind of both directions from there. And then in 2018, we adopted a sub-area plan for downtown Lake Stevens. And then last summer, while it didn't rise to the level of an officially adopted sub-area plan, did a lot of work on what's now called the Lake Stevens Industrial Center. So basically, previously the Hartford and Machias industrial areas kind of consolidated into one basically industrial and office and economic growth center. So that's really where the city is going to be able to accommodate its projected employment growth over the next 20 years. We have, I think, it was, I think, the second meeting in February where we went over some of the economic development and some of the employment growth targets and the city's ability to accommodate those. So again, that's reflected in the level of environmental review we're going to need to do. And another important reminder is that we do have SEPA documents, basically environmental impact statements that were adopted for each of those sub-area plans. So especially on the economic development and the employment side of things, we've actually projected for and accounted for the potential environmental impacts of more growth within those sub areas than have even been allocated to us through the growth targets process. So we've actually evaluated potential impacts above and beyond the growth that's been allocated to us. So we feel like from a SEPA side of things and from an environmental side of things, we're on pretty solid footing as far as being able to document how we've accounted for potential impacts of this employment growth. And then another major component is addressing equity and sustainability. You'll see a couple of new goals within the economic development element and a number of underlying policies specifically related to equity and sustainability. So we'd really appreciate feedback on those. So I probably touched on a lot of these, but just a brief overview. The framing the state, regional, and local planning context, discussing the sub-area planning efforts, identifying some of the major industries. We did do some community surveys over I guess it would have been mostly back in the summer and fall. And those were deliberately done in a similar manner, a lot of the same questions that were done back in 2015. So we could track that over the years and with subsequent periodic updates. And it did show some interesting trends. But so we talk a little bit about that within the element. Then, as I mentioned, there's two new goals and then a number of new policies. And those touch on a number of different topics, commercial development within sub areas, improving the jobs housing balance. That's something that, a lot of communities try to do. Most places within the Puget Sound region have very few residents that also work within the city. And so whatever we can do, and if we can pursue industries that better match our residential population, that's something that we can definitely strive for. Some other policies related to increasing partnerships and education programs. And then, as mentioned, a lot of additional language related to prioritizing equitable economic development, so improving equity, and then incorporating sustainability measures and concepts into our economic development framework. So those are new goals 6.9 and 6.10, and then the underlying policies related to that. So yeah, basically tonight, similar to past meetings, for these draft elements, we'd love to hear initial thoughts from the Planning Commission. One of the items that we had heard at the public service during our last discussion in March related to the public services and utilities element was, is there an opportunity to incorporate more metrics into the policy language? Policies, it's kind of a delicate balance between becoming too prescriptive and really identifying quantifiable metrics within your policy language. A lot of times that might be more appropriate, but there definitely are opportunities at the high level if there are specific metrics or specific industries or, specific, employment shares or something similar that we want to incorporate. You don't need to have that specific feedback as far as numbers tonight, but if you have general thoughts about how we can better provide kind of quantifiable measures, that's definitely something that we can incorporate as we revise these elements in advance of your next review of them, which holistically would be at the public hearing stage. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or help to facilitate any of the discussion.
I've brought up some questions in past about some of the increased cost burden for just the regulatory cost burden of development, especially around multifamily housing, to meet, I hear equitable outcomes and I hear, affordable housing, but at the end of the day, it's not financially really feasible to offer that with the current regulatory framework and the huge cost, especially around multifamily housing. The question would be there are things that are required by the state, but for the city, when it comes to some of the costs associated with that to hit some of these goals, is there a precedent to waive or some of the environmental impact fees, for instance, or these review processes to make it more affordable for economic development?
Yeah, so that's definitely, some of that will be covered probably more within the housing chapter. But from the economic development side of things, a major reason that cities adopt things like planned action ordinances is so that you can shift the environmental review, both the cost of it and then just the time associated with that up to the planning stage. So if you evaluate the potential impacts for a certain number, several 100,000 square feet of commercial development, a certain amount of industrial development, a certain amount of trips, that's something that we've tried to do. So we have incorporated some of those measures into our planning efforts. When it gets into actual implementable strategies and actions, they're definitely, within, say, an economic development strategy where you really hone in on specific actions that you're going to be taking. There definitely are things from a permit streamlining perspective that we can be doing. I think we're already doing a pretty good job as far as our ability to process permits and to be kind of development friendly. That's something that we hear pretty often. That doesn't mean that we can't improve. So if there is specific policy language or just a general policy framework that basically, emphasizes the point that Lakestevens is aware of this, that we want to continue to be friendly to businesses, to development, to basically balance, all of the different needs of the community. It's something that we've tried to do, but we can definitely incorporate that into the policy language as well.
Oh, I just had a super quick, this is really just a typo. It's 6.8.4. The goal in the goal section on page 57, it just says to understand economic disparities.
Okay.
They really want to understand.
Really, really.
They want to understand twice as much.
I'm sorry, I feel like I interrupted you.
While you're jotting that down, I've got another question. It's good that we're on target for meeting our goals or the imposed goals for employment and population. I think there was another goal that was listed on there. I don't have it in front of me, but if we meet those goals ahead of time, are they going to raise the bar? Are they going to move the goalposts at the county level and say, and are these goals going to be revised before we get to 2044 and such?
Yeah, they would be. So historically, the periodic update process has been it's kind of started at 7 years, it moved to 8 years, it was at 9 years. Now, moving forward after this cycle, so basically after our 2024 update, the periodic update requirements are going to change to every 10 years. So basically, we're going to have to go through a process like this at least every 10 years. And so we would be adopting a new, quote unquote, new comprehensive plan by 2034. So we would have a pretty good idea as far as how we're doing and meeting our growth targets by then. If we're at like 80 or 90%, I wouldn't say necessarily that, I guess it depends how you want to look at it, that cities either get rewarded or punished for exceeding their growth targets and doing a good job of accommodating more growth than other areas within the region. I'm
afraid we're going to get punished either way. If we don't meet our targets, we're going to be in trouble. If we do meet our targets ahead of time, especially, we'll be rewarded by higher targets. That's the thing I'm worried about.
Yeah, I mean, it's still really what drives the growth targets, especially since the adoption of Vision 2050, Vision 2040, and then now its successor Vision 2050 from Puget Sound Regional Council is the regional growth strategy, which is very much focused along corridors, along light rail, along bus rapid transit. And that is why cities such as Edmonds and Linwood that have basically the same population as us have been allocated 2 or 3 times as many new residents and two or three times as many new jobs. And that's, having had my quick adventure to Edmonds and come back, it was much more difficult to complete the periodic update because you're having to accommodate a whole lot more growth. And it was reflected in some of the fears in the community as far as, it's one thing to be adding 5,000 people or 7,000 people, but if you're adding 15,000 people or 20,000 people, or if you're Mount Lake Terrace and basically expect to double your population over the next 20 years, that's a different discussion with the community. So I don't think necessarily, I think we have that Lake Stevens has a pretty good documented record of exceeding, especially on the housing side of things, of exceeding its growth targets. But that wasn't reflected in this most current round of growth targets that were allocated to us at the city level. Still, much more of that growth went to Linwood, went to Edmonds, went to Mount Lake Terrace, went to Everett, Marysville, even some of the smaller cities that are closer to light rail got more of the growth than we did as a percentage. And so it's more so reflected on the housing side, but also on the employment. I think, what we're more likely to see is if we continue to see, in the kind of the Marysville, Arlington area with all of the new industrial growth, if there's if it's proven that there starts to be some spillover and we can capitalize on our proximity to those areas within North County, then I think we might get some additional employment growth allocated to us in the future. But they're still utilizing, I think, a growth model that still largely, I wouldn't say overlooks, but doesn't allocate us maybe the growth that we would be if we were 5 miles to the west, obviously.
Okay. All right. So what I'm understanding you're saying is that in recent changes that they have made, they have not done that where if you meet your targets early, they just give you more.
They haven't,
It's
no.
really an objective look at where they want growth to occur along those, where they're putting all their money in transit. They want people to move to those corridors. So that's where they're pushing their targets.
It is. And similar, they developed several alternatives as part of Vision 2050. And then, the county does as well. They're obviously doing a pretty major comprehensive plan update because they need to evaluate for the whole county. And so they have a couple different alternatives that they're evaluating, but pretty much all of those alternatives are focused on the concept that most of the growth is going to occur within these kind of high capacity transit corridors, whether that's light rail or bus rapid transit. And so even in cities where we've, I think in advance of the 2015 periodic updates, there was the buildable lands report and the growth allocations that occurred in, say, 2011, 2012, 2013. And the city, I mean, for those of you that, remember what Lake Stevens looked like, 10, 12, 15 years ago compared to what it looks like now, we blew by those growth targets within, 5 or 10 years. And we were almost at our full growth targets within, 8, 10, 12 years. And so even having done that, it's not like they doubled our growth targets in this current round.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. I think if we continue to document it, or if we, if transit service expands out here, or if basically we can create some kind of regional hubs and some industry clusters, that prove to be, really successful and really kind of economic trends go in that direction and we're able to capitalize it, that would be much more likely than us basically them saying, oh, well, you've exceeded and now we're going to give you a whole bunch more.
Mhm.
Switching gears a little bit, Switching gears a little bit, on item 6.53, it says explore expanding additional options for tourist lodging. From a policy and planning perspective, what exactly is that suggesting?
Yeah, we could probably simplify that language a little bit. I think that's just basically trying to build up our tourism industry and trying to basically create policy language and strategies. We obviously don't have that industry now. We've kind of explored it in the past. And so I think I did notice that one as I was looking through the packet today, that I probably would massage that language. Again, it's basically creating opportunities for additional tourism, for hotels, for, you know, identifying areas of the city where that would be appropriate, whether that's within the sub areas, probably most likely within the sub areas. You know, we're obviously a lakefront community, but it's a residential lakefront community. There's not really a whole lot of opportunities to be plopping in waterfront hotels. And so really how do we meet some of the regional needs, and how do we, you know, meet some of our local economic needs? How do we generate, you know, potentially generate additional tax revenue through lodging? And how do we create that kind of policy framework? So yeah, it's a bit of a clunky way of saying that. I think it was trying to build off of the existing goal language, and I'm happy to chat with Russ about that one. That was one that he had added. And so, yeah, we can definitely try to provide a little bit more clarity in the policy language.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think the language can be interpreted a couple of ways. Some of which I think the planning commission may still have some scars over with regard to short-term rentals. So if we're talking about you know, licensed proper hotels, then let's say licensed proper hotels.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've looked at that, and, you know, and that's been accounted for within some of our sub area planning efforts. Those are permissible uses, and we haven't seen that come for whatever reason. And so, you know, the comprehensive plan is not going to be our saving grace as far as, oh, great, we have some additional policy language. The hotels are going to come flocking to Lake Stevens now. But, you know, your comprehensive plan establishes the policy framework. And if it becomes an important priority for the city, then that gets implemented through our economic development strategy, through the city's budget. You know, how do we pursue this? And so, yeah, you know, are there opportunities to, you know, accommodate youth groups, take advantage of some of our recreational opportunities, some of the, you know, kind of the regional facilities that we have? And so, yeah, that's kind of where that was coming from. And so we can definitely work on making that a little bit clearer.
Great, thanks.
If I may.
Yeah.
It is no secret that I joined Planning Commission in 2010 because of our economic growth at the time, and have stayed on specifically this term because of my ownership of a local business and full disclosure in the industrial district on a very busy corner in that area. I also want to acknowledge that the gentleman that joined us this evening met with me, not to put you on the spot, but met with me at our last open house and had some really, really important thoughts on where the shift in where we are putting things in Lake Stevens, what we are putting there and why. So if there's any opportunity for him to have a conversation with city staff, and your name escapes me, I am so apologetic, but we had a very nice discussion that evening, and I was glad to see you attend this evening. Yeah, with that said, my concerns, my comments tonight are starting at 6.2, where we talk about where we're concentrating commercial development within established areas. We've talked about that already this evening. That's already a known entity, but we have given up now the commercial area on 92 for more commercial area on Highway 9, which is now being converted in some places back to residential. And then there was a little hub of commercial at the peak of 20 that has now gone to residential fully. And the city is taking over a large portion of that 20 corridor for their future growth. And so with that all done, how how are we concentrating commercial development when we keep shrinking it for either city use or for residential, because we want to be first to the line when it comes to meeting all the residential targets? It's not always great to be first.
Yeah, no, and it can be difficult balancing our residential and our employment needs, and especially when you have a sub area that has allowed primary uses that are both residential and commercial in nature. If it's something that within the sub area plans where, especially having evaluated it, so say for example, the 20th Street Southeast Corridor, I think we're at about 90 to 95% of our planned action threshold. So that means I think we did environmental review through the planned action environmental impact statement for, I believe, up to, let's just say it was 1,200 units. And I think we've now permitted, say, 1,100 units within there. So we're basically, up till now, if you had a residential development within that sub area, and as long as we haven't exceeded the cap on that, then you don't have to do a site-specific SEPA document. You don't have to do it. And so if we can document that we've largely met our residential needs and that we should be amending the sub-area plans to start to limit the amount of residential development is there and really to focus just on the commercial, I think that's something that through this process, we can take that next step and be amending the sub-area plans to have a greater focus on employment, especially if there is concern that residential uses within these sub-areas are dominating the commercial and employment uses. That definitely is something that should be reflected within the policy language and within the planning documents.
I would hope that would be a focus.
Okay.
We have not only met, but exceeded what's been asked of us before. And according to Olympia, it'll never be over, to Commissioner Morton's point. So if the city could then be its own leader, blaze its own trail and start to push back, if not on behalf of existing business owners, but on potential of more, I would highly encourage that. Continuing on, if I may.
Yeah.
633, which is not something that is redlined, but to develop a business retention and expansion program to foster and grow local businesses. We have great local businesses. My own local business tried to expand and was hamstrung for regulatory issues on some sort of building code. We needed trees around our industrial area. So if you are going to that retention and expansion, you already have people that are here and invested and have employees in this community. And anything that can be done, including not making me put in low E windows or a certain fire code or whatever, because I'm already here and we're already running. So that would be a request. Again, I come from this, full disclosure, I've already said that. And then we've talked about the jobs I had one more. It was 643, the allowance of sufficiently and strategically allocated industrial business zone land to improve the city's job to household. If we are using already existing zoned commercial property for other uses and have a constraint on what that property is, we only have so much, then we're going to run out of, and the housing has already far outweighed what we're doing for our economic growth. So I would just encourage maybe a little forethought when it comes to always saying yes. And I'm looking at you, but I'm not directing this directly at you, but always saying yes, we will absolutely meet this goal at the expense of that goal. And the economic growth of this city, it has caught it in the shorts for far too long.
Thank you.
Got one on 6.5.4, the investment in public spaces and recreational facilities to attract tourists. When I look through these, I see language about the Lake Stevens, just the municipality, not the physical, not the lake itself, as a driver of economic activity. You mentioned before that the lake is almost entirely privatized, 99+% is privatized. Just to have a consideration to include investment in public spaces with a focus on access to the lake, as well as recreational facilities to attract tourists. What makes us unique is not, you know, some park off the side of the road, it's the lake. And there's an embarrassingly small amount of public access to the lake. So if there are opportunities for the city to have it stated in here, there's an aggressive approach to trying to acquire property in the future. There's some scar tissue from it as well, from, you know, a year and a half ago when I don't know if it's the last purchase or sale of public property, but there was a sale of public property off of, oh gosh, what's the road? Chapel Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that was a burn for the community. And yeah, so for the city to truly make that investment, and I don't know about you guys, but my family spends a remarkable amount of time and money going and making direct investments in other municipalities throughout the region because of their public parks and access. That has to be a part of it. That is the culture of the Pacific Northwest, and that could be part of the culture here in Lake Stevens.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, I mean, if there's some policy language that we can add specifically related to the economics component of public access and recreation and kind of build on some of the existing language. We obviously, you know, public access to the lake is, you know, a pretty major component of the parks, recreation and open space element, which is now has been several months since you reviewed it, but there were several additional policies related to that, but that was more on the recreational side. But if you're wanting, I definitely think we can, you know, make what would be most appropriate within this economic development element would be obviously the economic component of that, and really, you know, calling for, you know, capitalizing on the lake as an economic asset, not that we're, you know, monetizing the shoreline per se, but just basically providing opportunities and really trying to attract additional visitors. That's, you know, as you mentioned, it's kind of focused on the city as a whole, but if we, you know, if there is some additional policy language that we can incorporate, if there is that direction from the planning commission, that's definitely something we can look at doing.
Well, that would definitely be a direction from me, at least. One other follow-up is I think it's the second page of the introduction, gives the population projections. Page 11, figure 1.1-6. Does this take into consideration the possibility of annexation into the future? I know that seems to be something that we've moved on from, but I look at these dates and a lot of them have been in the last few years. So that population projection, just wanted to know, does that consider possible
in the
annexation?
graphic?
Yeah, the graphic.
Yeah, so that's the city proper, but we can definitely, you know, we have those projections for the UGA as well. We have so little UGA left that it only adds a couple thousand people.
Okay.
You know, really all we have left now is the area south of 20th, between basically 123rd to the east over to, I think, about 107th is where it stops, where it's still all unincorporated county. And then as you get further west, the stuff south of 20th is in the city again. But that has, I think, a couple thousand people that live there. And then there's this area down here that has maybe 500 people that live there. And then that's really about it on the residential side. The only remaining part of our UGA, if you look at the map on the previous page, is in the northeast corner.
Well, in my question is about the amount of developable land there.
Yeah. And so
how that would impact population.
it wouldn't really, if you look at the growth targets within those areas, and really the largest areas in the very southeast portion of our UGA, so south of 20th, there, if you go back a page to the figure 1.1, the annexation history, that kind of that white area at the very bottom. So to the east of the 2009 annexation. That's really pretty much all of our residential growth capacity, and it's not high density, but it's large. That area is built out. And I think that's factored into some of the annexation decisions in the past, that it's largely a built out area with not the greatest infrastructure. So I think it wasn't a priority for the council. But that being said, I think moving forward, we're still, actively pursuing annexation of the full UGA. I think, one, because it makes sense for cities to be within, for areas to be within incorporated cities, and two, to show that we have been actively annexing our UGA. And so the next time there is the opportunity to expand the UGA, are there areas of the rural urban transition area, which is basically kind of the precursor to the UGA? Are there adjacent areas that would make sense to bring into the UGA so that they are eligible for annexation in the future? We obviously, we had gotten a request and we provided the applications for our UGA requests, and as of now, none of those are being recommended. There are a couple kind of minor components of the Sunnyside one and the one down off of SR9, some very small areas, but yeah, moving forward, especially, if we were to annex the entirety of our UGA, yeah, it basically show that the county and the state that we're serious about, accommodating our growth in the future. So that's kind of a very long way of saying that there's not a whole lot of capacity within our unincorporated UGA. I could have said that as well and saved you all 5 minutes.
Right. If there's nothing more.
I think it's all written very well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so the plan is for at that May 1st meeting, there's no action needed. To bring forward the environment and natural resources section, and then we'll Jill and Russ and I are going to be working on some of the land use and housing components, and basically we do want to have an additional community event related to that just before we get into the SEPA review and really evaluate our growth targets. And in advance of issuing the public review draft of the entire document, we want to allow for additional opportunities for public feedback. So we'll be working on scheduling that, and we'll keep the planning commission apprised on those dates so that we can try to maximize attendance and involvement from the planning commission.
Yeah, so just to double check, so we'll be just having a May 1st meeting and a June 5th, or we'll be doing a May 1st and a 22nd and a June 5th
I think-
and 19th?
I think the May 1st, let's plan on the May 1st, and then we're going to be working on whether we hold, if we have kind of more of if we use the equivalent of a second meeting in May, more for a public event, we're not limited to just holding it on May 15th. We still can hold it then. But if you can give I'd like to work on that the next few days and just try to identify the best possible date. I know that most of you have already that you've reserved those dates. So if we can make that event work and basically hold that in lieu of your general meeting and have a community event on May 15th instead, I think that would probably be ideal. We're trying to maximize the amount of information and the amount of public feedback and trying to get as much good information in advance. So it was just trying to maybe have a little bit of flexibility if we needed to push that back a week or something like that. We obviously, you then run into Memorial Day. We would have it obviously before then.
Okay.
So if there are any thoughts, so May 1st is a definite, and then May 15th is still a maybe, and
Maybe.
but we'll be
But not-
provide.
But not May 22nd.
May 22nd would only occur if we didn't hold the May 15th meeting. If basically we had a special event on, say, the 22nd, instead of having your second meeting on the 15th. So,
And the same thing for June, it would just be June 5th for sure, but maybe the 19th?
it would, and it can't be the 19th because the 19th is Juneteenth. And so that's actually a holiday. So we wouldn't hold it on that. So if we're going to have either an event in June in lieu of your, whoa.
So sorry. I thought I was muted. I must have bumped it when I sneezed. I'm so sorry.
All right,
Okay.
Like, wow, they just must
So-
have come right through the vent.
so, so David, just to confirm, definitely May 1st, maybe May 22nd, definitely June 5th.
Yeah, and then if we have something, we were gonna need to change that June 19th anyway. So if, say, we have another, so we want to have basically, opportunities for people to comment on the whole plan, but really, I think what people are going to be the most focused on is housing and land use at one, and then transportation at the other. So we're looking for a potential date for kind of to introduce some of the work that Transpo's been doing on the transportation element as well, and I think that would be appropriate for June. So we're not going to have the meeting on the 19th because that's a holiday. So we're potentially looking for different dates for a second, either it wouldn't necessarily be a meeting or even a special meeting. It might just be like a community event that the planning commission would be invited to.
Are we moving to Mondays at some point over the summer because of? the farm-
Yeah, I know that we have, yeah. And Russ had talked about that. So we can check back in on that because, yeah, obviously that gets to be a little bit hectic down here. So that might be I can't remember when it really gets bad in June, I know, obviously, and especially when school is out.
Yeah.
And so I can check in with Russ. He's out this week, but we can definitely talk about that. And I'll just, write a reminder to myself that just like, let's finalize the next couple months updates so that
Yeah.
everybody knows what they're
And-
dealing with. So,
The farmer's market starts in May.
yeah, it starts in May, and I couldn't remember if it had gotten really, it obviously, when more people are out, but yeah, I think we'll want to move probably to Monday starting in May then. And so,
As soon as possible, please,
Yeah,
those dates.
And that would be great. Just for me and actually for Bruce's daughter, track season starts up and Wednesday is always track meets. And those they're never short. So,
Okay.
yeah, if we were to move those in May to Mondays, that would be ideal.
yeah, and so does it, I'll check. If it starts on May 1st and that's the opening day of farmer's market, maybe there is an opportunity to shift it to the following Monday. So we'll get that, I'll do that first thing tomorrow and really look at that and try to align that because I forget that it's already the middle of April and we've got to start accounting for those things.
Okay, well, we'll move on to commissioners' reports. Start with Commissioner Morton.
Yeah, I saw on the news.
Mike.
Oh, thank you. So I saw on the news about the Sparman rezone, which is just south of Stitch Lake. And I was kind of puzzled. I was like, wait, did this ever come to the planning commission? Did we ever see anything about that? Is that something we're supposed to get to see, or was this something that only goes to city council?
No, so rezones are one of the only things that go to the hearing examiner for a recommendation and then move forward to the city council. So other quasi judicial matters, comprehensive plan amendments, things along those lines come to the planning commission, but that was a conscious decision by the city, and that has largely been the trend for things like rezones that kind of when they're site specific, it makes more sense for those to go to the hearing examiner for the initial public hearing and recommendation. And then the city council is the one that ultimately acts on the recommendation. So no, that's not something that needs to come when there's kind of large scale rezones as part of, say, a comprehensive plan update, then yes, absolutely. You make the recommendations on those types of rezones.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Commissioner,
My thoughts.
um,
That's all for me.
Commissioner Jennifer Davis.
Nothing for me.
All right, Commissioner Holt.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give the group a heads up. I might be taking a trip to Norway this summer to visit family. And I'm not sure if I'm doing it in June or July or August or May. Just to give you a heads up.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Dewar,
Nothing for me.
Commissioner Huxford.
I spoke at the last meeting about my concerns with Public Works not responding to some requests, long-term requests for the speed abatement that they've already purchased on South Lake Stevens Road. I have now received confirmation from Council President Peter Shagan that he will sit in with an in-person meeting. And as we were walking in today, Chair Davis and I compared notes, and he has not received any feedback from Public Works on his issues. So we are hoping to create a meeting that involves things having to do with significant road issues, what they already have assets to invest in those. And we have Council President's support to sit down with those folks, and I will continue to try to get a meeting on the books.
Right. Commissioner Packard?
Nothing for me.
All right, and nothing for me as well. Is there a planning director's report?
No, nothing major. We're just continuing to be really busy. We are hoping to bring back some of the code work, but just given the number of land use applications and then the amount of time that we're spending on comprehensive plan update, obviously, we've had to push some of those things such as the process code that we do really want to update some of those sections to streamline it, to make it a lot easier to read the development code so that you don't have to go into 3 different chapters to learn about things like appeals and all of that's good stuff. Even I, especially when I came back, I was like, where is this again? So we are looking at trying to improve some of that work, but some of that I'll probably need to shift more into the late summer and fall. But other than that, no, I believe that the planning commission is off the city council is off the next couple of weeks. I think their next meeting isn't until May 14th now. So they're off the next few weeks. So yeah, nothing to report from council, nothing major.
Could you actually provide just a brief update on the Lake Stevens Historical Museum, the property just west of here?
Yeah, I can probably Russ would be the best one to provide it on that. I haven't been involved on that as much, but that's definitely something that I can note and that we can provide that as an update at a future meeting. And I would just note, I think that we talked about this, but we have, with the city council approving the code cleanup, we are now in compliance with House Bills 1110 related to middle housing and 1337 related to ADUs. We've started to get some initial inquiries related to that. I had a counter visit today, walking people through some potential options. And so that is really a major component of our ability to meet our growth targets, is just given that most of our greenfield development has, been exhausted over the last, decade. We're going to be more and more reliant on that. So we're starting to see some interest, and it's largely been just from individual property owners, just curious what they can do. So these are existing, a lot of them longtime Lake Stevens residents that are looking, and a number of them have talked about providing opportunities, for places for their kids to live and things along those lines. So it's not necessarily just big developers looking to come and cannibalize Lake Stevens. It's actually the people that are recognizing that we do have housing issues, both in the city and regionally, and are looking to take advantage of our updated code. So.
Right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.